Master Cody was a real one. He always had Dexter's back no matter what, and he's one of the few characters in the series who rarely did anything questionable or wrong. But what if I told you that his innocent decision to play wiffle ball in the backyard on Thanksgiving in season 4 quite literally destroyed the lives of everyone in Dexter's family? Spoiler alert for all seasons, that one small action got his mom killed, made Debra fall in love with Dexter.
Everything isn't always so black and white.
Oh my god, bro.
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man? Get your ass on.
And put Harrison through every traumatic event he's ever experienced, among many other bad things. This is what's known as a butterfly effect, where one small and seemingly meaningless choice or action triggers a series of events that ends up causing massive life-changing consequences. Like if you spilled a cup of coffee in the morning, making you late for work, forcing you to take the bus instead of walking, and then that bus ends up in an accident that paralyzes you from the waist down, which could all have been avoided if it wasn't for that spilled cup of coffee. So today we're walking through Dexter season by season, but in an alternate timeline where Cody never played wiffle ball on Thanksgiving. Let's see just how different things play out. So we begin at the Thanksgiving gathering at Dexter and Rita's place in season 4.
Cody fell into your shed.
What? Is he okay? What happened?
Well, he's fine. He hit a wiffle ball onto the top of the shed, climbed up to get it, the skylight cracked, and he fell through.
But this time Cody decides not to play wiffle ball and instead does something else, like eating triangle pancakes or something. Because of that, his wiffle ball never gets stuck on the roof of Dex's shed, which means Cody never falls through the roof trying to retrieve it, and the neighbor Elliot never smashes in the door with an axe to get him out. So Dexter is no longer forced to move his kill tools from the shed to the shipping container. Now, this might not seem like such a huge deal, but trust me, it is. And in order to understand just how decisive this one change is, we need to fill in the blanks of what actually happened off screen in episode 12 of season 4, specifically the events leading up to and following Rita's death. So after some minor detective work, this is the most logical timeline I could come up with for what was happening behind the scenes in episode 12, The Getaway. We know that when Rita's body is examined by the police in the beginning of season 5, Masuka estimates that she was killed about 8 to 12 hours earlier. But for that to actually mean anything, we first need to figure out what time it was when Masuka said that. There are several watches visible in the scenes after Dexter's devastating discovery, but none of them are clear enough to rely on. Dexter's watch, however, gives us the best clue, and it seems to be pointing at somewhere around 10:45 PM, even though it's still very blurry and hard to make out. But I actually found a way to confirm that this must be the correct time. We know that Arthur Mitchell picks up his car from the auto shop while it's daylight, but when the car later breaks down, it's already pitch black outside. And we also know that it breaks down because Dexter sabotaged it by removing the oil cap.
Where's my fucking oil cap?
So the question is, how long would it take for the engine to fail? I don't know much about cars, but Arthur's is a 1968 Ford Mustang GT500, most likely equipped with a V8 engine that holds around 5 to 6 liters of oil. Assuming the shop refilled it and factoring in a mix of city and highway driving, the engine would probably fail in about 30 minutes without an oil cap. So within that 30-minute window, the episode goes from daylight to darkness. The episode takes place in early December, when the sun sets around 5:30 PM in Miami, which means Arthur likely left the shop around 5:15 PM. Half an hour later, when the car breaks down, Dexter chokes him out.
If you want your son high-level wrestling, send him 2-3 years Dagestan and forget.
Brings him to the kill room and murders him, something that probably takes about an hour. Dismembering and cleanup would take another 2. For reference, in Dexter Resurrection, Harrison takes about 3 hours to do the same thing, but Dexter is faster because he's more experienced and he's got the right tools. Then, going out on the boat, dumping Arthur and returning home would take another 2 hours. That puts Dexter back home at roughly 10:45 PM, matching exactly what his watch seems to be pointing at. Now, obviously, these time estimates aren't meant to be down to the minute accurate, but that's not the point. The point is only to confirm whether the blurry watch time makes sense within a realistic window, and in this case, it absolutely does. So if Masuka's estimate is right, that Rita had been dead for 8 to 12 hours, that means she was killed sometime between 10:45 am and 2:45 pm. Now remember, Dexter sabotages Arthur's car and hides in the trunk at around 5:15 pm, meaning that earlier that day he would have needed time to prepare the kill room. Setting everything up, including gathering his tools, would take about 5 hours, so he would have gone to grab his gear at around 12:15 pm. And that falls right in the middle of Masuka's estimated time of Rita's death. Which means, using the same amount of convenient logic as the show itself, Dexter would have gone to the shipping yard to retrieve his tools at the exact moment Rita was being murdered. But in this timeline, Dexter never moved his gear to a shipping container, so it's still stored in the backyard shed. Which means this time Dexter is there to defend his wife, and so he does. Dexter walks inside his house when he sees that the lights are on, and he kills Arthur Mitchell self-defense in front of Rita. They call the police and report the incident. On to season 5. When homicide arrives at the scene, it looks like a clear-cut case of self-defense. Arthur was a wanted serial killer who broke into Dexter's house, and Dexter defended his wife. But the FBI still has to investigate, and since Dexter has now publicly taken a life, he's immediately placed on leave until he's cleared and psychologically evaluated. The Mitchell family, now knowingly forever safe from Arthur, since the death is publicly known in this timeline, agrees to not give the police an accurate description of Kyle Butler as a thank you to Dexter for saving them. Now, season 5 has 3 big plotlines. The Bear Girl Gang case, which is the main one, and 2 subplots, the Santa Muerte case, and Quinn and Liddy secretly investigating Dexter. So to make things simple and easy to follow, I will go through each by themselves in that same order. After a killer broke into their home, Rita and the kids don't feel safe in the house anymore, so they all decide to move. Dexter notices a bloodstain in one of the moving vans. He finds out that Boyd Fowler was the last person to use it and tests the stain for human blood, which it turns out to be. He tracks Boyd down, follows him to his dumping ground and eventually kills him, and then discovers that a woman held captive by Boyd saw him killing Boyd.
500 cigarettes.
But this time, Dexter is on leave and doesn't have access to his lab or the databases he'd need to identify the woman he saved. So he decides to show the unidentified woman the fates of the other girls in the barrels as a sign of trust, just like he does in the show.
Look. Look, or I'll cut your eyelids right off your face.
But now, Dexter, lacking a safer and better option, lets her go without knowing anything about her. Which means he never breaks into her motel room, never discovers that she's hunting down her attackers, and never learns that Robert Brunner is her first target. Dexter doesn't try to kill Brunner, doesn't learn about his alibi via the ankle bracelet, and most importantly, he's not there later to stop Lumen from killing him under the Tuttle Bridge. So without anyone stopping her, Lumen shoots and kills Brunner, thinking he was one of the men who hurt her. And judging by the large number of sex offenders living under that bridge, many of them possibly on parole, and with several police stations nearby, the cops would likely show up very fast. And since Lumen made no effort to hide her face, she'd stand out immediately once they arrived. If she's then caught with a gun on her, it's game over. And if she throws it away, it's also game over because her prints would be all over it. As a result of her poor planning and execution, no matter what she does after firing that shot, she is getting caught. So, Lumen gets arrested and sent to jail, but she doesn't snitch on Dexter. Lumen, of course, doesn't shoot Dan Mandel, and Dan never warns the rest of the group about her, and Masuka doesn't get to flex his knowledge about autoerotic mummification. Despite this, Jordan Chase still has the barrels moved from the swamp, but this time it's because of Boyd's disappearance combined with Lumen being arrested for murder. While being transported, the truck carrying the barrels gets T-boned by a drunk driver, spilling everything out. Homicide, where Dexter has just been cleared to return, is called to the scene and they quickly discover that the truck is registered to Jordan Chase. Meanwhile, Lumen is talking to the police, explaining her motive for killing Brunner. Even though it turns out that he wasn't one of her actual attackers, she still tells them about Boyd Fowler, who's later linked to the truck with the barrels through the finding in his apartment. Police then finds DNA from multiple perpetrators on the bodies, and with Lumen as a witness, Cole Herman, who showed his face during her assault and can be tied to the truck, becomes the prime suspect. A warrant is issued for his apartment where they find the 13 DVDs along with the childhood photo of the group. Dan Mandel can be tied to the crimes through his ring seen in one of the tapes, and later through DNA evidence found on the victims, just like in the show, except now he's still alive. More or less the same thing goes for Alex Tilden. So Cole, Dan and Alex are all arrested with solid incriminating evidence in a state with the death penalty. But since Jordan Chase never physically touched any of the victims, he can't be tied to the crimes and walks free. Or at least he thinks he does. Dexter sees this as a perfect opportunity to kill Dexter and stage it like he fled the country, and so he does. So in this timeline, even though Dexter and Lumen never work together, they still end up taking down the Barrel Girl gang one by one. Now let's rewind a bit and break down this timeline's chain of events in the Santa Muerte case. Since Dexter is still on leave during the first part of the season, he doesn't work the murder scene where Fauci Gobri was found decapitated. Dexter never spots the cigar ash lying in this small pool of blood, and no one else in Homicide notices it either, since in the show that clue went completely unnoticed until Dexter joined the case. This leads to the police never finding the cigar butt with the partial thumbprint, and they never trace it back to Carlos Fuentes. Which means the police never storm his house, and the undercover operation at the nightclub, the one that ended in a deadly shootout and with Debra killing Carlos, never happens either. Now the storyline with Quinn and Liddy in this timeline is also very different. Since the Mitchell family doesn't snitch on Dexter, the police don't have an accurate sketch of Kyle Butler. And no accurate sketch means that Quinn never tries to prove that Dexter is Kyle Butler. Plus, in this version, Rita was never murdered, so Quinn doesn't suspect Dexter of killing his wife, and Dexter is already under investigation. So Quinn never gets suspended and has no reason to hire Stan Liddy to spy on Dexter, meaning that Stan the man doesn't get murked. Instead, Quinn's storyline becomes more about building his relationship with Debra. The two of them never fight or break up because of Quinn being suspicious of Dexter, and since Debra isn't stressed about almost letting a hostage die, or about killing a person and not feeling guilty about it, or being suspended, the relationship is just more harmonious overall. Let's move on to season 6. By now, plenty of time has passed since Dexter was cleared for killing Arthur Mitchell in self-defense, and is finally able to get back to what he does best. Debra finds herself in another shootout, this time at a restaurant. She neutralizes the threat and becomes a hero, just like in the show. Later, when Quinn proposes during breakfast, he isn't met with a cold shoulder, because in this timeline, he and Debra haven't dealt with the same lies and betrayals as before, so they actually trust each other to have good intentions, and they talk it out like adults. Later, Debra tells him she's been offered the lieutenant position, and they agree to hold off on getting married. Quinn transfers out of Homicide so they can still be together, and Debra is promoted to lieutenant. As a result, Quinn never sleeps with Carissa Porter, a potential witness in the Doomsday investigation, and he doesn't stay the night at her place, and Batista never picks him up the following morning. Because of that, Batista never sees the box labeled Galler in Porter's house, and therefore never discovers Galler's notebook filled with drawings eerily similar to the Tableau killings. The news articles about an art installation on a campus featuring Galler and Porter also goes unnoticed, which means Porter never becomes a key witness in the case. By this point in the show, Dexter learns that Jonah Mitchell killed his mother Sally after his sister Rebecca committed suicide, and that he pinned it all on his dad Arthur. But in this timeline, that never happens because Arthur Mitchell's death is already confirmed, so the family doesn't live in fear. And even if Jonah did kill Sally, which he doesn't, he wouldn't be able to pin it all on his father, so basically the whole Nebraska storyline never happens. Instead, after brother Sam's death, Dexter deals with Ghost Brian while staying in Miami. Then fast forward a little bit, Miami Metro PD, thanks to Dexter's anonymous tip, discovers the boat where Travis Marshall and Steve Dorsey had been making deadly gas. Just like in the show, the police find Steve's body, the one that Dexter killed earlier, and his wife becomes the person of interest. Then they realize that Angel Batista had already gone to question the wife Beth, but he never came back. It turns out he went to visit her alone because he couldn't get a hold of his hungover partner, Quinn, and that's when Travis attacked and kidnapped him. However, in this timeline, Quinn isn't working in homicide anymore, so Batista had a different partner on the case, probably Mike Anderson, who definitely wouldn't have bailed on him. So this time, La Passion never got kidnapped because he had a backup when visiting Beth Dorsey. An outnumbered Travis simply realized his limits and decided not to attack and instead stay hidden until they both left. This means Travis never gets a hold of Batista's keycard and doesn't see it as a sign of God to carry out the gas attack at the police station. Instead, he targets regular civilians out in public, just like his earlier victims. Because of this, Beth doesn't have to sacrifice herself since she's no longer needed to carry or manually trigger the bomb. And because the wormwood attack never happens inside the station, Dexter doesn't stop it and doesn't become a hero. And I don't know if you remember this, but Dexter saving everyone's lives in this show is actually what triggers Debra's therapist to suggest that she might have romantic feelings for Dexter. So in this timeline, that whole weird storyline never happens, which is, pretty good. I mean, sure, a dozen civilians had to pay with their lives in a gas attack, but still pretty worth it, in my opinion. And of course, we can't forget that Debra is actually in a relationship with Quinn in this timeline, so it would be even weirder if her therapist suggested that she was in love with Dexter. Later, when Dexter lures Travis to his boat with this absolute banger of a video,
What I am. The beast is coming for you.
he isn't suffering from the effects of the nerve gas since he was never exposed to it in the first place. So this time, Dexter isn't busy trying to contact Will in the Upside Down, and he manages to sedate Travis with M99 and kill him exactly as planned. And that means that everything involving Travis in episode 12 simply never happens. Dexter isn't brought out to a circle of fire in the middle of the ocean, he isn't there to help these people from getting robbed or possibly murdered, Harrison doesn't get kidnapped, this police officer doesn't die, but most importantly, Dexter doesn't kill Travis in the church and Debra never walks in on him doing it. Meaning that Debra still has no clue who Dexter really is. The season ends with the police believing that Travis got away, making Debra look bad for failing to close her first case as a lieutenant. And this pushes her closer to Quinn, who offers her comfort and validation. And by now, Debra actually says yes to Quinn's proposal from the beginning of the season. Now let's move on from season 6 to 7. I give you full permission to comment something very hateful in the comments. I can't help myself, I'm sorry. 2 full seasons have passed since Dexter killed Arthur Mitchell in front of Rita, and their marriage is shaky to say the least. And honestly, it's been that way for a long time. Rita complained about Dexter being absent from the family as early as season 2, and he didn't exactly improve in seasons 3 or 4.
Dexter and I have something we want to talk to you about. What?
We're having a baby.
Add to the fact that Dexter cheated on her with Lila and that Rita and Elliot kissed. So yeah, things were looking pretty bad. My point is, their marriage was far from perfect before the end of season 4 of the show. And now in this timeline, we also have to remember that Rita saw Dexter kill another man. And that kind of thing would be deeply traumatic, especially for someone with a history of domestic abuse. Even if Dexter didn't hurt her, she'd never be able to look at him the same way again. So in this timeline, they actually divorce. The only reason it takes her this long to break up is because Dexter did, after all, save her life. And it fits her character to feel like she owed him for that. Dexter moves back into his old apartment and Harrison stays with him every other week, which brings Batista's sister Jamie into the story as his babysitter. She helps out whenever it's Dexter's week and he needs to take care of some after-clock errands. Now, let's move on. Since Dexter killed Travis Marshall on the boat and dumped his body in the ocean instead of in the church never became a crime scene at the end of season 6. That means Mike Anderson never drives home from the church that night and never runs into Victor Baskov, which means Victor never kills him. Without Mike getting slimed, Dexter doesn't kill Victor Baskov, and the police never cross paths with the Koshka Brotherhood, ultimately removing that entire storyline, which unfortunately results in Louis Green not getting brutally murdered by Isaac Serco. Since Debra never discovered that her brother is a serial killer, she doesn't try to keep tabs on Dexter all the time to stop him from killing.
We're gonna eat together, we're gonna watch TV together, we're gonna drive to fucking work together.
Hope you got a big shower.
She never calls and orders him back to the station, interrupting his stalking of Ray Speltzer, and she never assigns him to DNA test Hannah McKay just to keep him away from Ray. This lets Dexter keep on stalking. Keep on stalking, keep on. Okay, I gotta stop before I get copyright claimed. Anyway, he sneaks into the mausoleum at the Briar Cemetery, where Ray works as a groundskeeper, and finds the earring trophies that prove Ray's guilt. Without having to consult Debra about it, he kills him clean and simple, making Ray, aka Ankara Messi without hair, a half-episode kill instead of 2. Later, even though Dexter never DNA tested Hannah McKay, they still cross paths, first at the police station and then later at the Wayne dig site. Since Dexter was, just like in the show, the last person to ever talk to Wayne before he logged out by jumping in front of a moving truck, Hannah would naturally want to speak to him. So their interaction at the dig site still makes perfect sense, even without their earlier DNA testing introduction. Dexter notices that one of Wayne's victims at the dig site seems to have been killed by someone with a smaller frame than Wayne himself. So, just like in the show, he tells Hannah during their semi-flirty conversation that he thinks that she's a killer. Only this time, he doesn't fudge the blood reports to cover up the evidence pointing towards her. That is because in the show, Dexter's main reason for lying in the report was Debra knowing he was a serial killer. She was under a ton of stress and guilt for not turning him in, and Dexter, knowing that Hannah had immunity for any crimes she committed with Wayne, decided it was best to lie so Debra wouldn't spiral even more. But now Debra doesn't know about Dexter, so he doesn't feel any need to protect her from the truth, that Hannah is in fact a killer who can't be prosecuted. Later, Dexter suspects Hannah of being behind the deaths of her ex-husband as well as the previous owner of her greenhouse home. In order to get more evidence of her guilt, Dexter decides to apologize for accusing her so bluntly of being a killer. In the show, he tells himself that an apology won't be enough and that he needs a peace offering. And in that version, the peace offering is him falsifying the blood report that pointed to her guilt.
Came to apologize. It's a copy of the blood report on the bodies you helped us find. Wayne Randall's victims.
But in this timeline, he never does that. Instead, the fact that Dexter having killed Arthur Mitchell is public knowledge is enough for Hannah to lower her guard and to feel like Dexter isn't any different from her, and that Dexter really can't judge her since they both are killers. So she agrees to go out on a date with him. And as we all know, after Dexter hits her with the M99 and is just about to kill her, he lets her go, and then they take the bus to Freaktown and they ain't wearing seatbelts. The true crime author Sal Price takes note of Dexter and Hannah's relationship when he spots them together in the same car. However, he never threatens to expose Dexter for tampering with evidence because in this timeline, Dexter never did that. Without that leverage, Sal can't blackmail his way into getting an interview with Hannah for his book, and Hannah never confesses to the murder of Linda Johnson, and she never poisons him. Sal stays alive, and since he poses no real threat to either Dexter or Hannah, he's allowed to continue writing his book in peace. With Sal being alive and well, Hannah's dad, Clint McKay, doesn't show up asking for money because he can still get paid by Sal for information about his daughter.
There's a man in the window.
What?
Hi, Banana.
However, he does tell Sal about Arlene Schramm, a witness to a murder committed by Hannah. Debra believes that Hannah McKay has murdered multiple people, and when she hears about the lead, she looks into it. But she isn't as personally invested in the case in this timeline as she was in the show. You see, in this version, she, first and foremost, does not suffer from the horrible stress about knowing what Dexter does. She is also in a relationship with Quinn and doesn't get close to Sal. And of course, Sal never dies. So without these driving factors, Debra does not succumb to some rather unconventional methods to get a witness statement.
I have some time to think about this.
Okay, do that. And play with your kids. Because depending on what you decide, you might not get to do that for a really long time.
And without that, Hannah doesn't get arrested and doesn't get sent to prison. Now, before we move on to season 8, let's cover how the side plots in this season play out differently. The first one is simple. Since Dexter didn't kill Travis in the church, Laguerta never starts investigating the Bay Harbor butcher again. That means Captain Matthews doesn't return as police chief, since Laguerta never does him a favor in exchange for help with the BHP investigation.
Go home, Maria. The only help you'll get from me is a lift back to Cuba.
And of course, Debra never kills her, and Miami is short one bench. And also because Laguerta didn't get murdered, Batista actually follows through on his plan to retire and run his restaurant full time. Dexter kills Jensen, the Phantom Killer, instead of handing him over to the police, since Debra doesn't know about his secret. By the end of the season, Debra realizes that everyone around her are focusing on their personal lives. Batista with his restaurant and Dexter with Hannah. So she decides it's time for her to do the same, and marries Quinn. Let's move on to season 8. Because Debra never killed Laguerta, she still works at Miami Metro Homicide, which means everything involving the private detective agency and Jacob Elway never happens. Dexter doesn't kill Andrew Briggs, and Debra never kills the hitman Javier Guzman, aka El Sapo. When Dr. Evelyn Vogel reaches out to Dexter for help after receiving brain pieces on her doorstep, he's much more open to it. That's because in this timeline, Debra hasn't killed Laguerta, isn't traumatized, and isn't resenting Dexter for ruining her life.
He was being very uncooperative.
Here, Dexter's code and his double life are both fully intact, and yet to let him down. Then for a while, things play out more or less the same as in the show. Vogel receives a DVD with a recording of Sussman's murder. Dexter investigates and kills a few of Vogel's former patients.
Hey guys, I'm hiding underneath my roommate's Jake's bed. I'm gonna scare the crap out of him when he gets home from work.
And then Zack commits his first murder, and his parents sends him to Vogel for his psychopathic behavior. But here's where things start to shift. Since Debra is still the lieutenant, not Batista, Quinn gets promoted to sergeant. And because Quinn doesn't fail to get his sergeant position, he doesn't feel the need to prove himself as a real cop. So he never starts to stalk Zack and obsessing over finding incriminating evidence against him. That means Zack gets Quinn off his back. But he also gets Dexter off of him. And that's because when Vogel begs Dexter not to kill Zack, saying she sees potential in him, this version of Dexter actually listens and agrees to give him a chance. Once again, because in this timeline he hasn't gone through all the misery and chaos of the original series. He still trusts Vogel, and he still trusts the code. Now, with no one stalking and keeping tabs on Zack, Dexter isn't there to stop him from killing his own father, and so he does. And as we see in the show, Zack wasn't particularly well prepared for that kill, meaning that he will leave too much evidence behind and possibly even witnesses tying him directly to the crime. And with the victim being Ed Hamilton, his father, it doesn't take long before he becomes the prime suspect and eventually arrested and sent to jail. Since Dexter is with Hannah in this timeline, he doesn't go out with his neighbor Casey. And Oliver Saxon doesn't start to date Casey to get closer to Dexter, which means Casey doesn't get murdered. And of course, with Zack being locked up, he doesn't get murdered by Saxon either. This means that Zack never leaves that disgusting clump of hair under the table for Dexter to find. Dexter never tests it and never gets a familiar DNA match with Vogel. In other words, he never discovers that the brain surgeon is related to her. So what does Oliver Saxon, aka Daniel Vogel, aka Ryan Gosling, aka the brain surgeon, actually do now that he hasn't been discovered and everything is going exactly according to plan? Well, to answer that, we need to understand Daniel's motivation. Much like Brian in season 1, Daniel wants to reunite with a long-lost family member. But more specifically, he wants help navigating the world while still giving in to his murderous urges, the same way Vogel once helped Dexter. So in this timeline, Daniel reveals himself to Evelyn as her son without Dexter having any idea about it. And Vogel, just like in the show, is naive and full of guilt over abandoning her son, but now, with no one around to talk some sense into her, she actually agrees to help him. So together, Evelyn and Daniel move away from Miami, maybe back to England, to try and start over, and Evelyn tries to teach Daniel the code. And yeah, Dexter would believe that she simply left to get away from the brain surgeon, not knowing that she went with the brain surgeon. And so, season 8 ends with Debra, Evelyn, Daniel and the Marshal all surviving, and the Marshal, he moves to LA and joins the 20 Squad. Now, my other two Dexter Butterfly Effect videos, which you should absolutely check out if you haven't, only cover the first 8 seasons. And honestly, at first I didn't think that there would be any major changes worth mentioning in Dexter New Blood or Resurrection, because everything was, so predictable, because the only changes would be that nothing involving Dexter would ever happen. Like Matt, Kurt, Logan Prater and a bunch of others would never die. Some pretty straightforward stuff, right? But now, after thinking it through a third time, I realized I completely missed a huge detail. One that actually connects the ending of season 8 in this timeline to the events of New Blood. But how is that even possible, you may ask, when Dexter is still in Miami and not living in Iron Lake? Well, let me explain. It all begins with the massive 10-year time jump between season 8 and New Blood. Hannah dies of cancer, and Debra continues climbing the career ladder and eventually becomes captain of Miami Metro Homicide, just like Batista did in the original timeline. Let's move on to New Blood. With Debra now being captain, she is the one who holds the missing persons conference in New York City instead of Batista like in the show. Chief Bishop, who's personally invested in finding out why so many girls are disappearing in Iron Lake, attends the conference hoping for answers. In the show, Bishop tells Batista about the missing girls and she believes the cases might be connected. Batista then tells her about the brilliant young detective who solved the Trinity case, Debra, and Bishop is crushed when she learns that Debra is dead and can't help her. But now, in this timeline, Debra is alive, hooray! And she's standing right there, hearing Bishop out in person. Debra becomes personally invested in the case. It reminds her of the Barrel Girl gang, where the ringleader, Jordan Chase, got away. Of course, she doesn't know he's actually dead. So she feels obligated to help. She tells Dexter about the situation, and the two of them travel to Iron Lake to assist with the investigation. And with Dexter and Debra's incredible detective instincts, it doesn't take long before they get the creeps from Kurt. And without Kurt being under pressure from the investigation of his son Matt's disappearance, his guard is way down. I don't know why I said way that way. Anyway, meaning that when Dexter and Debra track down his off-the-grid cabin, which would be inevitable with a 24-hour surveillance, Kurt's motel room is still intact. He hasn't had any reason to strip it clean yet, and once they find that room untouched, it's enough to get a warrant for Kurt's arrest and a full search of all his properties. When the police locates his trophy room just a few yards from the cabin, it's over. So Kurt Caldwell gets caught, and as far as Resurrection goes, nothing involving Dexter ever happens, since the only link between New Blood and Resurrection is that Dexter gets shot by his son, which he doesn't in this version. So here we have all the bad guys that die in the show that survives in this version, and yes, I included Laguerta in this one. Here we have all the good guys that die in the show that survives in this version, and I put quotation marks on good because, you know, they're not all good per se, but they aren't necessarily bad guys either. And here we have all the bad guys who survive in the show, but die in this version. And here we have all the good guys who survived in this show, but died in this version. And you see, I only have one. I think there are probably more, but I couldn't really think about any others. This is the girl from a Resurrection that the tattoo collector was about to kill before Dexter sedated Lowell. So yeah, let me know what you think about this timeline down in the comments, and if you want me to continue making these kinds of videos, leave a like and subscribe, and I see you i nästa video. Så får du ha det så bra så länge.